Let's tell you about relations between South Africa and the United States. They appear to be deteriorating. Washington and Pretoria have taken different stances on diplomatic matters, in particular the unabating war between Russia and Ukraine. The U.S. has also threatened to pass a law that would prevent South Africa from carrying military exercises with Russia and China, with many pundits saying that that may not see the light of day. Let's unpack the latest developments. We're joined by Priyal Singh, senior researcher at the Institute for Security Studies, and he has penned an opinion piece on the relations between South Africa and the United States. Thank you very much, Priyal, for your time this afternoon. You characterize the political partnership between South Africa and the United States as having become difficult to manage. How so?
Well, I think it's become increasingly difficult to manage in light of the fact that if we had to just look at the United States' 2022 national security strategy, in which they very clearly, in very unambiguous terms, frame China and Russia as systemic threats that must be defeated and overcome over the coming decade. And this puts puts Pretoria in a very difficult position, given the fact that, on the one hand, South Africa we are guided by our constitutional democratic values, which, inform our relations with countries like the United States, countries from the European Union, and so on. But at the same time, South Africa is very much committed to its South-South agenda, which has informed Pretoria's relations with Moscow and Beijing as very key strategic allies over the next 10 years. So South Africa is in an increasingly precarious situation because this commitment to both of these agendas, if we can call it that, forces a confrontation with the United States' worldview and global mission over the coming 10 years.
Does it need to be precarious, the situation that Pretoria finds itself in? You speak of the United States mission. What then should South Africa's mission be? Does this not present an opportunity for that to be set out quite clearly, if it hasn't already?
Absolutely. There's always opportunities with all challenges that are encountered in any country's international relations. And South Africa certainly has many opportunities available to it to balance this, to balance out its relations with the United States and with China and other emerging powers, to promote responsible competition over the next 10 years. And this is the point I'd really like to stress, is that South Africa is very well poised with countries such as India, for example, to play this role to promote responsible competition such that African states and South Africa do not bear the brunt of irresponsible competition, resorts to armed conflict, rising military responses. South Africa should be at the forefront in proposing workable solutions to mediate and mitigate tensions between countries like China and the United States.
So what does responsible competition versus irresponsible competition look like?
Well, fundamentally, it means that we, as a global community, need to recommit to the global rules-based international order. And South Africa, I think, again, finds itself in a difficult but opportune moment, given the fact that South Africa is currently a member of the UN Human Rights Council. We've had previous terms on the UN Security Council. We're chairing BRICS this year. The United States' AGOA Act is coming up for discussion, and which will be discussed in South Africa this year. So South Africa occupies a number of very prominent international appointments in its 2023 diplomatic calendar, in which it can really frame this issue of responsible competition amongst global powers, basically, arguing that all states need to recommit to the rules that underpin the international rules-based order, that we should not resort to military responses. We need to find ways to see eye to eye, sit down at a negotiation table, and mediate, negotiate, dialogue over all of these incredibly complex and very dangerous issues that could force armed conflict between all of these competing global powers.
Yeah, you also mentioned in your article that this reinforced Pretoria's view of the U.S. as a hegemon that has sometimes abused its dominant global position, flouting the international rules-based order it purports to champion. And so, again, going back to this responsible competition versus irresponsible competition, how then do you speak to somebody who does not see the log in their own eye?
I think, to be fair, our International Relations and Cooperation Minister, Dr. Naledi Pandor, has done quite a good job in driving this message home in her various engagements in the United States and abroad, and in really pointing out the fact that there are historical issues at play here, in that certain countries around the world, like the United States, have flouted global norms, international law, in their military interventions and escapades across the world. And this has made countries in the global south increasingly skeptical, critical of the United States. So on the one hand, South Africa, we should point out clearly and be very, unambiguous about this, that when we see violations of international law take place, we should point it out and call it out consistently. However, South Africa's position so far has been to abstain, given the fact that it says, these violations are not pointed out consistently amongst the world's big powers, like the United States and so on. And I don't think that's a very sustainable approach moving forward. We ourselves should lead the way in pointing out violations of international law, breaches of the rules that underpin the global rules-based order, by the West and by countries like China and other emerging powers. It is a tall order to ask, but it is manageable. As a country, we are capable of adopting this approach.
Yeah, there's something in my mind that pops out about these violations of international law and in relation to the continent maybe. I mean, the bulk of the United Nations Security Council's work has got to do with conflict on the continent. And like you say, right, that consistency of condemning when people step out of international law, which we have not heard when it comes to the continent at least. Never mind the fact that we don't even have a permanent seat or we're not represented permanently there, at least an African country. But you also contend that the recently held naval exercises in South Africa with Russia and China was a clear step backwards for South Africa. How so?
Well, there's the argument and there's the counter-argument. On the counter-argument would be that South Africa hosts military exercises with all countries, from the West, the United States, France, Germany, other countries, in a very similar fashion as it conducts these military exercises with other countries like China and Russia. The point I was trying to make is that these exercises do not take place in a vacuum. They are context-specific and they are time-specific. And the fact that South Africa was conducting a military exercise, a naval exercise, for the stated benefit of all the three parties involved, China, Russia, and South Africa, does not bode well for South Africa. The optics of it is incredibly poor, especially among South Africa's other international partners, given the fact that this exercise was occurring on the one-year anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And this has been the majority of countries around the world within the UN General Assembly have been very clear in condemning Russian aggression, condemning the invasion, pointing out the violation of Ukraine's territorial integrity and in breach of international law. And the fact that South Africa was conducting this exercise exactly on the one-year anniversary of that invasion for the benefit of Moscow, the optics are incredibly poor. And we would have expected more from South African senior officials within our government to potentially intervene, step in, and reconsider the approach that they adopted.
Would there have ever been an appropriate time?
That's a good question. I don't think I have the answer to that, but certainly not on the one-year anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine. I don't think there could have been a worse time.
Priyal Singh is with the Institute of Security Studies in South Africa. Thank you very much. You can check out his opinion piece on their website.